One major aspect to a lot of shonen manga and other genres are strategic battle scenes. Now these are more than regular fighting scenes, and a well-written strategic battle scene will not only emphasize your character's unique qualities and abilities in battle, but it will also show how they plan and strategize. Today I will be talking about how you can create a well-written battle scene for your manga, comic, or novel. I hope you enjoy this video and it helps you with all of your creations. If you don't already know me, my name is Midnight Cross, and on this channel I dedicate all my videos to helping you turn your manga into a masterpiece. I'm currently working on my own manga titled Having Faith, which you might hear me talk about in today's video, but also in other videos on my channel. Now if you're new to my channel and you'd love to see more videos just like this one today, please consider subscribing and hitting that little bell icon to get notified every time I upload something new. I upload a new video every Sunday and Thursday all about manga creating, and I would love to have you join me on the channel. First of all, let's consider the different kinds of weapons your characters may use in battle. Now there are various kinds of weapons and things your characters could use in a fight, and so each of them are very different from each other, so it's important to know exactly what kind of fighting style your character will be using before you actually go further and talk about how you can actually create a well-written battle scene. Here are some types of fighting your characters may be using in your battle scene. So first of all is hand-to-hand physical combat. Now this category includes martial arts and karate and other kinds of physical combat sports. Now the next is gunfighting. So this category includes the various kinds of guns, such as rifles, revolvers, pistols, and shotguns. There is also sword fighting. So this category includes various kinds of swords, such as katanas, longswords, and machetes. There is also axe fighting, and this category includes various kinds of axes or maces. There is also magic fighting, and this category includes various kinds of magic, such as offensive magic. This category can also be combined with other categories. A gun or a sword could be enchanted with magic to make it work in a certain way. There is also ranged fighting, and this category includes various kinds of ranged weapons, such as bows and arrows. Now obviously there are so many different kinds of weapons I could mention because there are so many different kinds of weapons out there, but these are the basic kind of categories of weapons your characters might be using in your fighting scenes. Now the reason why it's important to keep in mind what kind of fighting style your character will be using is that each fighting style will be very different and will be represented in a different way. For example, if your character were using an axe would probably be a lot heavier than just using a regular sword, and that's something you need to keep in mind when drawing it. If your character is using an axe, they might have to carry the weight a lot more than they would be with using a sword. A sword might be easier for them to move around with. So that's just one example, but it's part of the reason why it's so important for you to decide what your character's fighting style is first of all. So this tutorial will be divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I will be talking about how to actually write the fight scenes, and in the second part, I'll be talking about how to write the strategy, and in the third part, I will be talking about how to actually draw the fighting scenes. So first of all, let's talk about the writing process of writing a strategic battle scene. My first tip is focus more on the results over the actions. If you're describing the actions too much as battle is happening, it's going to really slow the pacing. So even in a manga, even if it's just something you're showing, you don't really want to show every little thing that happens because it's going to really slow it down, and these battle scenes are going to be things that will likely be happening in a matter of seconds, so you really don't want to add too much filler in there that will slow it down. So here's how you avoid that. So instead of just showing, the punches, the kicks, and the shots that the characters get in, instead try and focus more on the results over the actions. So instead of showing a character punching, a lot of that can actually be filled in by the readers. The readers don't actually need to see someone punching, they can just see the result of the character bleeding afterwards or the character feeling very tired after fighting. It doesn't always have to be shown through a whole lot of punches and kicks and all that kind of stuff. You can also just focus on the results and let the readers fill in the gaps on their own. So of course you can show like the fighting moments leading up to that moment, but also allow moments for your readers to actually fill in the gaps on their own. If your character is exhausted, it's clear that they have just been fighting. If they're holding a sword and they're really exhausted, that shows that kind of feeling. If your character is bleeding, then it shows they've just been in a fight. If your character has, bruises and gashes on their face, then it also shows they've been fighting. So a lot of that can actually be shown and not told. So you don't really have to actually tell the readers everything. You can allow some moments for the readers to actually figure it out on their own and fill in those gaps, and that overall will really help the pacing of a battle scene. My second tip for writing a battle scene is to focus more on the thoughts over the actions. So try and get into the character's head as much as possible, because what's in the character's mind is going to overall make the battle scene more important. Think about while writing a battle scene that it's not just what's happening on the outside, but it's also about what's happening internally in the characters' minds. The reason a lot of anime battles are so cool is that a lot of what's happening is actually internally in the character's mind over what is actually happening in the battle. If you remove the character's thought process and remove, the emotion in a battle scene in an anime, it would be a lot more slower paced and a lot less interesting. If you look at a lot of the battles in Demon Slayer, for example, there are a lot of moments where Tanjiro is thinking about things or considering how to protect Nezuko. The thought process over action process is shown a lot in the scene with Tanjiro versus Rui. Tokyo Ghoul also has a lot of really good examples of showing the internal battle alongside the external battle. So overall, you not only want to focus on what is happening during the battle, but you also want to focus on the internal battle that is happening within the character's mind and what they are really fighting for. My third tip is set the stakes high, and this is where you really need to answer the question of why your characters are fighting. You need to give them a really strong reason, because that reason for your characters to fight is going to give your readers a reason to really want to root for your characters and support them throughout this battle. It makes the battle all the more interesting when your character has a really strong reason to be fighting in that battle. So maybe this battle is literally a life or death situation and only one character will make it out. Maybe they need to win the battle to protect someone they care about. Maybe they need to win the battle in order to continue in their goals. So whatever the situation, you need to consider how to make this battle so important to your character that they absolutely must win. They cannot lose. And when your readers see how important it is that your character succeeds, it will make the battle also more important. Never have a pointless battle in your story. Always make sure that your character has a reason to be fighting that battle in the first place. My fourth tip is keep it very fast paced. Excessive description is really not necessary. So as I mentioned earlier, in a lot of battle scenes in manga and anime, a lot is actually left to imagination. So you don't always need to show the punch, you can just show the character bleeding and he's clearly been punched. You don't always need to show everything, you can leave a lot up to the reader's imagination. And keeping it very fast paced in that regard is going to make your battle scenes more entertaining, because you really want to keep it very fast paced. You don't want to slow it down because as I mentioned before, this battle is something that's going to be happening in a matter of seconds. So it won't be, punch, the character says ow, it won't be a kick and the character says ow. That would slow it down a whole lot. So instead, you sort of just want to focus over the results more and just focus on having a lot more about the actions over the actual process of that happening. Keep it very fast paced and try to avoid excessive descriptions or excessive scenes that are really not necessary during the battle. So if you add too much description to something that's happening in a battle, it can really slow it down and make it feel like the battle is happening for a much longer time. In a fight scene, less is always more. My fifth step to writing a good battle scene is that the battle should always move the story forward. You should never have pointless battles in your story. Always make sure that it adds to the plot in some way. It should contribute to the plot or help your character in some regard. It should add something to your story. So let's say your character is going on their quest and another character stops to fight with them. This fight would be rather pointless because there is no reason why your main character should be fighting with this other character. It can get boring if there is no reason behind the fight. However, let's say the character stops them and the main character realizes that this character has something important to them. Now there is a reason for them to fight, and through fighting this character, the main character will be able to gain the item they have. Now that we have added this, if the main character fights them, it will move the story forward. My sixth tip to writing a battle scene is to add dialogue moments throughout the battle. So if you just have a whole lot of fighting all at once and no dialogue breaks, it can sort of become a bit tedious. Whereas if you add a bit of fighting here and then break it down with some dialogue and then a little bit more fighting, it will sort of break down the battle scene into more easily digestible parts, basically. It's like drinking water to help swallow the food. The food is the battle scene and the water is the little bit of dialogue that you add to help break down that fight scene a little bit more. Don't add them talking while fighting because that would be a little bit more unrealistic. I doubt a character would be able to talk while they're swinging a sword, for example. That would be like, you've gotten stronger since last time. No, I don't mean like that. Add breaks during the fighting scene where they speak instead. So have, a kick, a punch, and then they back away and they say something like, you've gotten stronger since last time, and then the villain says something. So just break down the bits of fighting and break it down with some dialogue in between to make it more easily digestible. My seventh tip to writing a good battle scene is to use the battle to actually show who the character is. For example, a character in a battle can have the choice to spare the villain or kill the villain ruthlessly, and that is something that shows a lot of character. So during a battle scene, you can actually allow that to really show who the character is at their core. You might think that in every battle scene it's just about the characters fighting, but it really isn't. A battle scene is another way to show a lot of really good characterization, and it's a way to show who the characters' personalities are. So in a battle scene, if your character is really bloodthirsty, their attacks would likely be more ruthless or savage, whereas if your character is more compassionate, they might only knock the enemy back and even spare them. A more playful character might enjoy teasing their enemy and injuring them a little and then allowing them to try and fight. A more egotistical character might use the fight to show off their skills or special weaponry. A battle scene can really tell a lot about a character in their empathy and their personality. So when you are designing a battle scene, consider who your character is at their core, their personality, and consider how that personality would affect how they actually fight. My 8th tip for writing good battle scenes is actually something that you should develop more over the story, and that is, don't make your character someone who instantly has amazing skills. Show a character's growth from beginner to expert over the course of the story. You shouldn't just have a character be instantly strong the moment they pick up a sword. I was actually talking about this in my recent video, in my Shonen Powers video, where I was talking about how a character shouldn't be instantly strong. A reader should actually be able to see the character's growth process and actually be able to tell that they have significantly grown over the course of the story. They shouldn't just have those abilities instantly, they should actually be forced to train those abilities and get stronger over the story. Even if your character was given some amazing magical abilities, they should need to train those abilities in order to become better at managing them. You don't need to have a massive training arc, but it does help if you show a little brief glimpse of how that character is actually training themselves and getting stronger before they actually get into this fight. And even when they are in the first fighting scenes, it's unlikely they would be a complete expert, because in the basic fighting scenes they probably wouldn't have fought like that before. So they would still have those beginner moves and they would still need to learn basically as they are fighting. They would still need to learn from practice. And that's something I feel like you really need to show during your battle scenes. So don't just have a little bit of training and then the character is suddenly amazing. Make it a kind of growth process over the story. At the beginning, they might barely be able to pick up the sword. And then in the first battle scenes, they may sort of be trying to swing their sword around and they're not really sure what they're doing. But over the course of you adding more battle scenes and showing that character's growth and how they are working on themselves, they should overall slowly become better at battle and become better at fighting and overall grow into a better character. My 9th tip is give your characters each a unique method of fighting. No character's techniques should be exactly the same. One character might use one type of sword stance, and another character might use a different kind of stance. I recommend that you try and find a way to give your character a technique that really stands out among the other characters. So even if both characters are using a sword, or both characters are using a gun, or some other weapon or method of combat, it should be different from each other. They shouldn't have the exact same method of fighting. So for example, Inosuke in Demon Slayer has that sword with the chipped out parts, and that's very unique, no other characters have that. Kagura in Inuyasha uses the wind as her weapon. Naruto uses Shadow Jutsu as one of his main moves, even though it's more of a beginner skill. Each of these characters use fighting techniques in their own unique way. So I recommend when you are creating a fighting system and developing a battle scene, I recommend you give your characters each unique fighting techniques also that can really help them stand out in their own battles. It will also make that battle scene more entertaining for your readers as well, because your readers will be expecting that character to use that special unique move, and they may have a character who has unique fighting skills that they prefer to watch during battle, and that all the more makes it even more interesting. My 10th tip is research from real fights, and don't just watch videos or read things, actually write down notes. And think about the things that you may need to focus on in your manga, like where do the characters aim, where do they need to focus on, what are the points, how do they hold the sword, what is their stance, that kind of thing like that. So it really depends on what kind of fighting skills your characters will be using, but depending on the fighting skills, try and research online or in other places and see actual real life examples of that skill being used. There are actually a lot of videos on YouTube like this, so you could look up sword fighting tutorial, gun fighting tutorial, martial arts tutorial, anything like that. And those beginner tutorials can actually teach you the basics of those skills and help you to know how your characters would be acting when they are learning that skill too. It would also help you to know where your character is actually supposed to aim when using that skill. So even if it's something that is also using a lot of magic, even if it's something like that, you may want to do some research and consider how the characters might use that skill. Ultimately, what I really want you to take away from the tips in this writing part of the tutorial is that I really want you to keep in mind that you need to allow your readers to imagine more. You don't just have to explain every little detail to them. There's a lot of things that they can take away from it that they can imagine on their own. So to help you understand this and to help you show more of what I would take from the tips in this video, I wrote 2 examples of 2 different fight scenes. The first fight scene is a fight scene with a lot of unnecessary description, and the second fight scene is a fight scene that allows the readers to imagine what is happening more. When you are writing the fight scenes in your own manga, try and use a mix of allowing the characters to imagine and a mix of descriptive wording as well. So here is the first example with a lot of unnecessary description. I lunged towards Maria, my fist poised to strike. She turned, her leg kicking my own from under me. She brought her leg back and kicked me 3 times in the stomach. On the 4th attempt, I grabbed her leg, stabbing her with the knife hidden in my sleeve. She stumbled back in pain and I rose, kicking her in the side, then pushing her against the wall, my hands clasped around her throat. So as you can see, this is a scene with excessive description. It's really not that necessary. You don't need to explain every little thing that happens, and writing a battle scene like this can really slow down the pacing. Whether you are writing it in a novel like this or in a manga format, having a fight scene like this really slows it down, especially when you are describing every little thing that happens. When I write fight scenes, I like to get more in the character's head. Now, not everyone likes to do this and some people have different methods of fighting. However, here is what I would do if I was fixing this battle scene and making it more interesting to readers and allowing those readers to use their imaginations more. I lunged towards Maria, all of my fury bubbling to the surface. She dared to show her face after everything that had happened. She turned towards me, that sick smile still lingering on her face. I wanted to rip it from her face, and lost in my fury, I tried to. She saw through the rage and accepted the challenge, swiftly knocking my legs from under me. I was falling, and she was still there, watching me. Every nightmare I had had of this moment now became real and replayed over and over again. I couldn't die here. If I died here, their deaths would have all been for nothing. She kicked me in the stomach, then once more, then 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I grabbed her leg and raised the knife that had been hidden in my sleeve. She screamed and stumbled down, blood gushing from the wound. With that distraction, I kicked her back, pushing her against the wall, my hand to her throat. I will make you pay for what you did, I growled. Even as I held my hands around her throat, she continued to smile, as if she was mocking me still. So adding emotion to your battles can really add a lot to the pacing and also show how important that battle is to that character. You need to remember that the battle scenes aren't just about the fight itself, but a lot of it is about the character's emotions and how the characters are dealing with that fight. So in that previous example, you could see how emotionally attached that character was to the villain in that scene, how much the character wanted to succeed. And so ultimately, when you're writing your battle scenes, you need to consider that as you go forward in creating it. The battle should actually not be about the fighting, but it should be about why that battle is happening in the first place. When you add a reason to your fight scenes, it's going to make the battle more important and help your readers feel more connected to it. Now we're up to the second part of this tutorial, which is talking about the strategy. You'll notice that in a lot of anime and manga, the battle scenes will have a lot of strategy behind them, and that's what makes the battles so entertaining. So you will notice that in a lot of manga and anime, the battles will usually not just be about the battle itself, but also the planning behind it. You will notice this in a lot of popular anime and manga, like Death Note, when there's a lot of planning behind Light actually doing the attacks. Demon Slayer also is a good example of showing a lot of strategy throughout the battles. So my first tip for adding strategy to your battle scenes is remember that physical strength is not the only weapon that can be used in a battle. The mind is actually also a very good weapon that can be utilized in a fight. For example, your character could be against a very strong opponent, but maybe they are easily deceived. Your main character could make it look like they are about to attack when really they were setting a trap for the attacker. Your main character could be someone that no one believes could fight well. They could look weak, but actually they are insanely smart, and during battles they prepare traps or lure the attackers into attacking themselves. Adding strategy to a fight scene is about looking beyond the basic fighting and finding the way to succeed. My second tip for adding strategy to a battle scene is focus on each of the character's unique skills. Your character may not be the best at using a sword, but they could be very, very fast. Your character could have empathy, which can help them see the battle scenes in a different way. Your character could have magical abilities they're just learning to experience. During a battle, try and focus on their most unique qualities and think about how that can make them stand out in a battle and make them do better in a battle. As I mentioned earlier, Naruto uses Shadow Clone Jutsu, which is something he learns at an early stage and learns to perfect and become really good at. Much of the series focuses on him using this skill in various ways. So when you are creating a battle scene and try and think about how you strategize in it, try and look at each character's unique skill set and think about how that character can use those skills in that moment in the battle. When you learn how to use your character's unique skills, it will help them to stand out in battle more and it will overall make your readers more interested in the end result of that battle. Now the third stage of this tutorial is the drawing. Let's talk about the drawing component and how to actually draw and illustrate these fight scenes properly. We've now talked about how to write these scenes and how to strategize for them, but how do you actually show it in a way that is clear and concise to your readers? My first tip for drawing a fight scene is to use a wide variety of various angles. So a wider angle could show the commotion of a battle scene, whereas a much closer angle could show the character's reactions. So here are some examples of how different fighting stances could be shown at various angles. So in a kick, a wider angle could show not only the character kicking, but also their reaction. With a strangling moment, with the strangling we could use a very close angle to show the strangled character's reaction. In a sword fight, you could show the character's sword clashing at a side angle. In a martial arts battle, you might want to choose a wider angle to show both characters' actions. So when drawing a fight scene, I like to use a variety of angles and draw them in a storyboard style. So first of all, I want you to try and think about the actions you want to happen. You might want to sketch them out in a flat side-on style to help you envision how you want this scene to progress. So here we have a character punching, the other one kicking, and then that character falling to the ground. However, you can stretch these out into various angles until you find the style you want and the style that fully emphasizes that scene the most. The second tip is draw the lines of motion. Now I draw these lines when I'm first drawing the poses and breaking it down into shapes to help me draw these more dynamic poses and poses with a lot more movement in them. Let me show you some examples. So in a very dynamic scene with a lot of motion, I first like to decide where the character's body is going and draw that line of action. So if a character is leaning forward, I would draw that line at more of a diagonal angle. However, if a character is tilted back, I would draw the line back slightly. My third tip is use speed lines and impact bubbles. These can help your readers to know where the flow of action is happening and where the impact is. Speed lines can really help to show motion in a battle. So if you just had a punch with no action lines, it can be difficult for the readers to envision the scene. But if you show the speed lines, it really makes the readers feel more immersed and helps them to really see and almost feel the speed of that punch. Now, while you're showing the speed lines, you can also use impact bubbles to show where the character has been struck and help them to also know where the character has been hit. My fourth tip is use sound effects wisely. So adding sound effects every now and then can make a scene more immersive, but they shouldn't be used all the time. Having a character grunting at some moments or screaming every now and then can be good and add a more realistic effect to a scene. My fifth step for drawing it is break each segment of the battle into its own kind of motion. So basically break it down into panels and try and show each motion of the battle in as little panels as possible. When you are drawing a battle scene, both characters, the attacker and the victim, should both react. It wouldn't just be a punch and your character's not reacting. If there's a punch, your character would also have a reaction to that. If there was some magic used, both characters would have a reaction to that. But you really also want to simplify this motion to show it in as little panels as possible. So here are some examples. So let's say you were showing a character slapping. Don't show a character slapping and then their reaction. In the first panel, it looks like the attacker is simply touching their face. So instead, you can show it in one motion with the hand to the side, motion lines, and the character's reaction. Now, another example here is this character slamming the other character against the wall. This again can be shown in one panel with just the motion lines. Then there's also kicking, so one character moves forward and the other one is propelled back. This is why drawing the storyboards first can really help a lot, because you want to try and find a way to show each motion in as little panels as possible in order to keep things fast-paced. So instead of showing these scenes, which could be shown in 2 panels, you should try and simplify it into just one panel and find a way to keep each motion as simple and fast-paced as possible. Next tip is show the impact. Here are some examples of how to show the character's reaction, the character's body reaction and impact during a fight. So first of all, the part of the body that has been hit will be forced back on impact. So if it's in the stomach, the character will be bent over around that area. If it's in the head might be snapped back. So wherever the character has been hit, that part of the body will be forced backwards. Now another tip is that if the character is thrown backwards, their hair will fly forwards. Their eyes might be closed, their eyebrows furrowed slightly, and their mouth might be open in surprise. Now another thing here to keep in mind is if a character is using a weapon and is fighting against another character, they might be poised forward. All of their weight would be put into the sword. The seventh tip is find the character's center of gravity. Now everyone has a center of gravity and it's how we stay balanced when we're moving and walking around. When fighting, there should be at least one part of the character's body that is always bracing themselves. And as I mentioned earlier about drawing the motion lines, when you're drawing those dynamic motion lines, you also need to consider the center of gravity when drawing that. So usually when fighting, there will be at least one part of the character's body that will be on the ground and bracing themselves. Usually it will be their leg. Here are some examples of center of gravity in anime fights. So my 8th tip is study from real fights and learn about where the weak spots are. Now, I'm not an expert on fighting, but I believe the weak spots are in the places where there's no bones. So between the ribs, in the eyes, in any of the joints, that's kind of the weak spots. So when you are studying your particular style of fighting that you're having your characters fight in, study what the weak spots in that fight are. If you look at self-defense or fighting training, they will usually talk about where the weak spots actually are. Make note of where these weak spots are because these are the places your character should be aiming as they are going through the fight. Studying from real fights in your character's fighting style can really help you to make the fight scene look more realistic and make that whole fight more effective as well. When a reader is watching the fight scene, they'll be able to know that that fight scene is realistic, that you have studied that and you have gotten the details correct. It adds a lot more realism to a scene and it makes it more accurate when someone is reading it. So thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what kind of fight scenes you're developing in your manga, comic, or novel because I would love to hear about it. Feel free to connect with me on any of my social media at Midnight Cross because I really enjoy hearing from you guys. Again, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!